Greetings, everybody. Welcome to greetings. Welcome to the Bible study hosted by Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church, physically located in Washington, D.C. But this class, this time together, will be hosted over a Zoom platform and also live stream to YouTube. To anybody who's coming on through the YouTube channel, please know that we have a Metropolitan representative from this side who will be looking back and forth between YouTube and the Zoom platform. So if you have something that you'd like to offer for the conversation, for the dialogue, maybe your perspective or a question or a comment about what we're talking about, please put it in on the YouTube side, and then our Metropolitan conduit will put it on the Zoom side so that we can at least add it to the conversation here. Sister Joan, welcome. So good to see you. Thank you. I do understand that there's a local event in the DC area that a lot of the folks that come to this particular class or attend this class virtually will be virtually attending that. So our conversation may go a little bit differently today. It may be a little bit more of a, just kind of a discussion, maybe a one-on-one discussion with me and you, Sister Joan. I'm not sure. No
That's
pressure. Okay.
All right.
No
Thank
pressure.
you.
If you could just answer all the questions we have about the Bible and, the other texts that we'll be using, that'll be fantastic. I mean, you're probably thinking, what am I doing here? Why didn't I just go to that other thing? No. Oh, I see more folks coming through. So I think they're coming to save us, Sister.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I think, honestly, I think, studying sacred scripture is important, certainly. But I don't think it always has to be solemn. I think we can, we can laugh about things, and we can, the idea of being human, if you can't laugh at some of it, I think we're going in the wrong direction. So, welcome. I'm not sure, Jay Caldwell. Who's that?
Jackie.
Oh, Sister Jackie. Greetings.
Greetings.
Yay! And who do we have on the Metropolitan side? Who's running the Metropolitan conduit? They might be running it outside of the audio.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to welcome you and say, hey.
No, it's me. It's Reverend Cosette. I'm sorry. I was on the other side, on the YouTube side typing stuff.
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah, no problem. I didn't want to create pressure around it. I more wanted to say hey and not just keep mentioning the Metropolitan conduit. So, Reverend,
no problem.
Reverend Cosette, it's wonderful to have you amongst us tonight. And feel free to jump into the conversation too. Let's do this. So for those of you joining tonight, we are working through the sacred text, the Bible, and we're focusing on 1 Kings. We're going to be in chapter 3, 4, and if I remember correctly, it's like 9 or 10, depending on where we end up focusing tonight. So I was also part of the 12 noon class, and we started in the biblical text with chapter 3, 1 Kings chapter 3. And we read through chapter 3, and then we touched base on the book Holy Imagination, which is the book that we're reading alongside the Bible study that we're doing. And this is written by Reverend Dr. Judy Fentress Williams. And with her work, we're on pages 110 through 114. If you're looking on a like a Kindle or something like that, we are in chapter 10, and we're starting with the subsection test number 1. We might zip back into the part that starts with Solomon, circuit 960 to 930. But it's right there and then through the test number 1 and test number 2. So we'll kind of focus through there. So let's take some time to pray. And then I'm thinking we'll start tonight by beginning with the sacred text, with the biblical text, 1 Kings chapter 3. But I'm certainly open to doing it differently too. So we'll open with prayer. And then if everybody's on board with starting with chapter 3, we'll just have different folks read. And then we can jump in, okay? Eternal and loving God, thank you so much that by the time we even call upon your name, actually, even by the time we think about calling upon your name, you are already here, that you are amongst us, that you have promised to be amongst us when we are together, even 2 or more are gathered, and that you make promises also to be with us individually, that by the time we get together and even get to this point where we begin to pray, you have been creating sacred space here in all of the different virtual entry points that we have tonight in the physical space of Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C., and all the places around. That there is no place that cannot be sacred just because we name it secular. Thank you, oh God, that you are with us this day, this evening. Would you help us to create conversation and space and growth that goes so beyond a to-do list or a checklist, that we would know that we met with Almighty God tonight. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we have somebody else on as well. Is it Michal? How do you pronounce your name, please?
Michael.
Michael, greetings. Thank you so much. We are in 1 Kings chapter 3. So would it be possible to get some volunteers to read from chapter 3? There's probably about like 4 different sections we could do. Yes,
Yeah,
Sister Joan. Sister
I'll
Joan,
read.
could you do verse 1 through 9? Reverend Cosette, could you do 10 through 15?
Yes.
And would anyone else be willing to read, or I can jump into?
I will.
Oh, okay.
That
Greetings.
was Jackie.
Sis Jackie, wonderful. 16 through 22. And Sister Michael, if you'd like to do 23 through the end, or I can do that.
I have a little too much background noise. I'm gonna listen for right now.
Yeah, wonderful. No problem. No problem at all. Yeah, I'll do that. So we'll just read through chapter 3 and then we'll open it up a little bit. Okay. Sister Joan, please start us off.
Okay, Solomon asked for wisdom. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because a temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking accordingly he offered sacrifices and burnt incense on the high places. The king went to Gideon to offer sacrifices, but that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. Verse 5, at Gideon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. Verse 6, Solomon answered, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on the throne this very day. Verse 7, now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. but I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Verse 8, your servant is here among the people. You have chosen a great people, too numerous to count our number. Verse 9, so give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?
Verse 10, it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, because you have asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right. Verse 12, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor all your life. No other king shall compare with you. If you will walk in my ways, keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life. Verse 15, then Solomon awoke. It had been a dream. He came to Jerusalem, where he stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. He offered up burnt offerings and offerings of well-being and provided a feast for all his servants.
Verse 16, now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. 17, one of them said, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house. I had a baby while she was there with me. 18, the third day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. 19, during the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. 20, so she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. 21, the next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I had born. 22, the other woman said, no, the living one is my son. The dead one is yours. But the first one insisted, no, the dead one is yours. The living one is mine. And so they argued before the king.
Verse 23, then the king said, this one says, this is my son that is alive, and your son is dead. While the other says, not so, your son is dead, and my son is the living one. So the king said, bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. The king said, divide the living boy in 2, then give half to the one and half to the other. But the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because compassion for her son burned within her, please, my lord, give her the living boy. Certainly do not kill him. The other said, it shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it. Then the king responded, give the first woman the living boy. Do not kill him. She is his mother. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. Thank you, everybody, for reading. Where would you like to start? We can start in the biblical text. We can start in the Holy Imagination text. What sticks out to you? What caught your attention?
For me, and I know it was mentioned earlier in the 12 noon service, 12 noon study, but just the posture of his heart of, that he was vulnerable enough to say, I'm a child and I'm scared and, I need help with leading these people, with having a discerning heart. And he didn't selfishly ask. But I think of good leaders that you want to look to the hills from what's coming your help. You don't want to get to that place where you feel like you know it all. I got it on my own. So that piece definitely is a point of meditation for me.
Mm-hmm.
That sticks out to me.
Yeah, I like that. And also in the 12 noon service, because it kind of is, right? It's like worshipful, right? We had brought up what does it mean to be a good leader, like a responsible leader or an honorable leader, and what connection is there to Solomon's prayer? Where is his heart? We also talked about too that and this came up in our reading just now. Some of our translations say mind and some say heart, right? So if they're trying to get at the same thing and they're using different interpretive language to do it, then that helps us to start thinking about what is this motivation, or what is this characteristic of leadership that this story is trying to point to. It's wisdom, sure, but there's something else going on there too. Thank you, Reverend Cosette, for bringing that forward. Anybody else want to jump in? I think it's interesting that he calls himself a young child, right? I'm just a kid. Because every time I read that, in my mind, he's 7 years old. Because there is a story in the story of the Kings that it's like the child that ends up ascending the throne is a very young child. And so his mother is also there guiding him and ruling, right? So every time I read this, I have to remind myself, Michelle, he's not 7. Like, this is a literary thing that he's doing in the prayer and in this story to kind of situate himself through humility, right? So anyway, that's just my own.
Yeah, I was wondering how old he was, because I thought he should have been at least maybe late teens, but early in his 20s, somewhere in there. When somebody said child, I was completely thrown off.
But wasn't he not the youngest son? Because the older sons thought that they were supposed to get the throne after David, and they sort of put themselves on the throne, but Solomon was the younger one. So maybe that's what he's comparing himself to, his older brothers, that he was a child, but basically he was the youngest one.
Right. And he's the youngest child of Bathsheba too.
Yes.
So he's like the youngest of the youngest, maybe.
Mm-hmm. But
And
he was still an
right. Still
Mhm.
an adult.
Mhm.
So right, an adult getting married to all sort of folk, and doing, getting politics done and all of this kind of thing. He doesn't have that kind of he doesn't have an additional adult guidance going on because he needs it in that sense, like in a what am I trying to say? Not genealogy, but like age-wise, right? It's not age he's trying to get at. He's trying to get at humility or position. So Sister Joan, I really appreciate what you said there, because that's something that we can kind of acquaint ourselves with as well, right? My sister is 18 months younger than me. I'm 53. So that means that my younger sister is 51. But in my mind, she's always my little sister, right? It's not like I treat her like a baby, but it's still like I have to remind myself that Solomon isn't 7 years old. I have to remind myself that my sister is 51, like a full-grown woman at 51. Like, we are okay. So I think we always have a tendency to position ourselves based on where we are in relationship, whether it's family or the church or work time, like this one's been there for 5 years, this other person's been here for 15 years or whatever, that I think that's part of what's happening too. Yeah, I like that, Sister Joan. Thank you. I don't think I ever thought about it like that before. All right, what else is going on?
So he's the king, and he's asking for wisdom and knowledge, asking God to give him the ability to be a good leader. You would think he would ask for material things. But he didn't. Apparently material things didn't mean that much. I know he had in his heart that David had wanted to build a church, church to God.
Temple.
Temple, yes.
Yeah.
And he had told him he was going to have to do it. So I think he was thinking, I'm getting this big responsibility on me, and I've got to lead all these people. I need some help, God.
That's true. This is no side hustle. This is the real deal. This is the real deal going on here. Yeah. You know what? And at least in the evening class last week, we talked about how God told David that David was not going to build the temple, right? Because David was a warrior. And so God was like, you can't be of war and build my temple, right? You can't have blood on your hands like that and build my temple. You're doing what I'm calling you to do, but this is not going to be your job. Like Solomon's going to do that, right? So or the next king. So Solomon comes in, he's going to be the one that builds the temple, but yet he also has blood on his hands because he's taking care of some of the king's enemies when he first gets into power. But we talked about how the text creates the story around why Solomon has blood on his hands. It's like, well, if Solomon also has blood on his hands, how come he's allowed to build the temple, right? And the way that the text sets it up is to say that these are leftover things that were happening from David's time. And David gives him guidance to say, look, when this person shows up, I need you to know they were about this. And when this person shows up, I need you to know that there was a deal that we made with this guy, so he can't leave his house. And if he does leave his house, then he's got to go. So, all of these things have explanations around them. And one of the reasons that I bring that up is because in the beginning of chapter 3, it talks about not only the people, but also Solomon going to the high places. Now, high places is often code for worshiping other gods. So they're going to the high place because there is no temple, right? But they are offering sacrifice at the high places, including Solomon. But Solomon is listed as a person who is also obedient, faithful, following God, right? So these narratives are being crafted in such a way that can help the reader then and now understand how is it possible that God is still in this, right? How is it possible, if we just look at it literally, if he's worshiping or sacrificing at the high places, then how is that any different than when the people were acting up during the judges' cycles, right? How is it different? And so they're trying to contextualize it within this larger narrative, right? God has promised that the line of David will continue and that the line of succession will happen that way. And then everything is crafted around that narrative. And then, he offers his prayer, please help me know what to do. I can't remember who said it. Was it you, Sister Joan, talking about like you would think he would be asking for material things?
Yes.
Yeah, so sing more about that. Why would we think that?
Well, he's king, and the king is supposed to have a lot of wealth, and he uses that wealth to purchase friendships from other countries and things. So you would think that he would have enough wealth in order for him to be recognized as a king by these other countries. And if he had to build a military, he would need money for that. So you would think that he would want to have a kingly treasure.
Okay, yeah, yeah. And if he was a warrior, we'd call it a war chest. Right?
Yes, right.
I like how you use the language of purchase friendships.
Mhm.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Anybody want to jump in on that? Because true.
Yeah.
Reverend
He
Cosette,
did eventually.
like,
He did
Yeah,
eventually.
right. But the thing is we're saying friendships, but it's really alliances, right? And so there's an exchange, and that's when you think about transactional relationships. In order to gain territory or gain, and I can cross past, your territory. What benefit do I gain for you crossing? So you have to offer something. So just a transactional relationship.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the ways that we could enter that part of the conversation is what does it mean to have transactional relationships, right? In 2022, a lot of our language around like Christian discipleship or what does it mean to be Christian community, would be very critical of transactional relationships, right? We want to see people as more than just what they can do for us, or just when it comes to church leadership, right? It's very easy for church, like, and I don't mean this in any specific way, I mean it more generally, like administration, right? It's like, well, we need this much money to pay the apportionment of the blah, 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 and this and that, and the lights on and the mortgage and whatever else, right? Sometimes what happens in those conversations and beyond is that the church loses sight of non-transactional human relationships and starts talking about how can we get more people in the church to get butts in pews to have more giving units. Now, I'm not saying anything specifically about anybody. I'm saying this happens all the time. And if you're around enough church people, if you go through seminary, whatever, you're going to hear this conversation. You're going to hear folks slip right into this, right? Because the goal of making the budget, whatever the thing is, the lights, whatever, becomes the thing. Right. And I think one of the things that the prayer of Solomon is I don't mean this flippantly, but playing with a little bit, right? Is like, what does it mean to pray for character? What does it mean to pray for guidance? What does it mean to pray to be a moral or a righteous leader, rather than whatever that end goal is? Like Sister Joan, like you're saying, like, I've been dubbed to build this temple. I'm gonna need some things, right? Like it would be very easy to make that move, but this text doesn't do that. Any other thoughts before we make a different kind of transition?
If I could just say one other thing, that,
Please.
just being, I've been in media for like church media for a long time. And, but what happened during pandemic is you're trying to quantify and qualify transformation. And when you do that, you're looking at your numbers, how many followers, and then you're looking at your financial efforts in feeding the community. So you're doing work, but you're quantifying and qualifying, and then you can lose sight of the character of like the value of character. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because we have quarterly conference, and you have to say, like, how do you say that I'm doing work and not, you just got to weigh that, because it can sound very numbers driven, and you can be just so focused and thinking I'm helping people, but I'm qualifying it and quantifying with numbers, both financially and just, audience members.
Yeah, and money's a real thing, right? Like it would be very not only flippant, but also very naive for us to say that any church in 2022 is going to exist without having to deal with money of some sort, right? And I think part of it is, how do we do that, right? We talk about the church and even disciples of Christ being set apart, being different or whatever. Part of that conversation could be, you know, how we interact with money. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like we give all the money and we do this and we do that and like being rich is bad. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying there are ways that we can interact with money and be so driven by money that we are no different than anyone else, right? So if we want to use that language of set apart, if we want to use that language of we're trying to create a different something, right? Or we're gearing up toward a different something, then the way that we go about it is going to have to be different too, right? The means justify the ends is that only goes so far, right? And then what? So yeah, I like that. I'm going to bring in something else that came through at the 12 o'clock service also. We talked about, somebody brought up the text where it says like, it was actually, this brings us to the Holy Imagination book, right? Dr. Fentress Williams on page 111. This is a couple of sentences right before test 2. So if you're looking at it digitally, it's right before test 2, the Queen of Sheba. In the hard copy book, it's the top of 111. And it says, Solomon responds to the test by testing the plaintiffs. The test is not designed to determine the truth, but to identify love. So I'm just gonna, before I even say what I'm thinking about that, I just like to open it up because we already have this Solomon's prayer is helping us play with what does it mean to be a leader, what's important. You know, if you get the opportunity to pray and God says, whatever you ask me for, you're gonna get. And Solomon chooses character and guidance and humility, right? We're already looking at something different. Now, Dr. Fentress Williams is saying this test is not set up. It's not designed to determine the truth, but to identify love. What do y'all think about that? I mean, it's a serious test already.
Yeah, this was a psychological thing that Solomon did. And you have to be smart to know how to play that. And so that's what he did. He played on the psyche of both of these women. Okay, since we have one baby here, let's just split it in half. And he was thinking that the one who doesn't want this baby killed is going to be the real mother. He sort of knew that. And actually, she played it out. But it was psychology that he played on those women in order to find who the real mother was.
Right. And, you know, to some extent, the story is, I mean, it's out there, right? Like, grab me a sword. Let me just take care of this business right here. Like, there's 2 of you, now there'll be 2 of the kid, right? It's playing out the ridiculous, right? But yes, what you're saying, it's also addressing the psychology of the 2 women, right? The one woman who is desperate enough to switch the babies out and grieving and hurting and who knows what else, right? Maybe feeling guilty that she rolled over on the baby and killed the baby, right? And then playing to the other woman who has the living child, who at that point, he's also playing on how he understands motherhood, right? That a mother would sacrifice her own needs for the benefit of the child's life. That even though that would figuratively crush her, right? That she would put that aside in order that her child would live. And this gives hints of other sacrifices that mothers have made, right? Hannah brings, what's his name? Who was it?
Samuel.
Samuel. Yeah. Okay, Reverend. It's recorded too. I can't even play it off later. So Hannah, what is it? Samuel. Hannah brings Samuel right to the temple, and you know, in one of these classes we played with in the beginning it says I'm just going to give the child back to you, Lord, right? And by the end, after she weans the child and goes to do it, then she says, I'm lending you this child, right? And we talked about like if there was any significance there, like after she, you know, she was so grateful just for the reality that her status was going to change. She would never be barren again, right? And that she was able to you know, be seen by her community as a productive member of the community based on what they considered okay for women. And then, you know, she spends this time weaning the child. There's connection there. And maybe that word lending wasn't just a switch of a word. Maybe there was significance there. And yeah, so this story, this test, and Solomon's strategy is banking on the psychology, as Sister Jonah said, the psychology of the women. What else is going on there?
I have a question though.
Please.
I was a little confused when I read that statement by Judy Fentress Williams, because it seems to me the objective was still the truth. It's just like you said, the strategy was to use psychology. So when she says it was not to determine the truth, but to identify love, it seemed to me like it was to identify love in order to find the truth.
Yeah, because the truth is still part of this. Right? It's still part of the equation, or however we want to talk about it, but how does he go about doing that? So maybe, and this same thing came up at 12 o'clock and I didn't think of it then. I'm thinking of it now when you bring it up, right? I wonder if it's because like maybe based on what they were saying or how they were saying it or how they were acting or something, maybe Solomon already knew the truth. He was just like excising. No, that doesn't even feel right to me. Even as I say it out loud, I'm like, really? I'm going to give him those powers, omniscient powers? Because the text says like they're of the same status, right? It's very clear that they're setting them up with the same titles, right? The same categories. So the same status of women, they live in the same house. The babies are only 3 days apart. It's not like this one's walking and this one's, in the arms. And there was no one else in the house, right? It's like, it's very clear that they're laying out, there is no difference going on here.
Now, I guess it's fortuitous that this story is what was there, because I studied this story for a totally different reason. It was around bed sharing, and I was looking for an incident of bed sharing that was in reference to the community I was talking to, and the Talmud gives a relationship between these women. They were not harlots in the old Hebrew text. They were daughter-in-law and mother. The mother and the daughter-in-law had both lost their husbands in war, and that's why they were alone. There was that difference between ages. But the other piece in there is that the daughter-in-law would be bound. She could not marry again because that mother had a son. that son was that infant, and she by law was bound to marry that son when he got older. So she would have to stay single and until this boy became of the age that he could marry. So the death of her baby, that's why she switched them. Because if that mother's baby was dead, then she would have freedom to move on, to marry again, and she'd have this child. And that was a setup. I don't know the laws, but apparently the Talmud has that law. And maybe he was trying to elucidate. I was surprised that they called this woman. I never viewed them as harlots.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was surprised when I've come back to read this text. Somehow I always thought that they had some other relationship, but they changed the context of it by calling them harlots and no relationship. They're just friends who had baby. But that mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship, maybe he knew that he would be able to get that, how he could get that story out. He suspected that that was the mother's child. And this girl wanted to be taken away from that obligation to wait on this man child to grow 12 or 14 or whatever the age is he's supposed to marry. And that was fascinating to me.
Yeah. So there's so much from there, right? So one is that if two women are alone without husbands, then there are very limited ways that they're going to be able to make money or get food or whatever. So it could be that the way that they were doing that was through sexual currency, right? If they were out of options and that was an option for them and they needed to eat, it could be that. So it could be that, harlot, prostitute is in the NRSV. It could be that that's coming from there. It could also be that men had no idea how to describe women that weren't attached to like an older brother or relative or a kinsman redeemer or a husband. And so it's like, well, they're not part of any of these respectable groups. They're harlots, right? So that could be the original community doesn't know what to do with them, or it could be the interpretations that we're reading, right? The people who are creating the interpretations are like, we don't know what to do with you, two independent women living and raising your kids, right? What in the world is going on there? And if they're not married and they just had a baby, now the scramble for patriarchy is to find out, well, where's the guy, right? Because everything is going to center there. That's going to be the priority for whatever this family is. The other thing too is that the rabbis have a long history of batting back and forth about these texts, right? What if Abraham was blah, blah, blah? What if these women were blah, 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 or whatever? Because part of their training is to wrestle with the text, to literally wrestle with it, that there's not such a protective boundary around however you originally heard it. So part of what's happening there is a respect for the mystery of God. That if we look at a text and say, well, it absolutely has to be this, then what are we saying about the mystery of God that it's pointing to, right? Are we saying that we can also figure out God? And to honor the mystery of God, it would be blasphemous almost to say we figured it all out, right? So there's a lot going on there. I think, when we look at the political realities of the times where these texts are emerging, like what you're saying, Sister Michael, the daughter-in-law, mother-in-law, that whole relationship there, that changes that brings in a whole other dynamic that's part of it. And then Solomon, if Solomon did know that, he'd be able to logic through that too.
Mhm. It was that custom.
Was it?
I said it was the custom. That's coming out of the old Jewish text.
Right.
Custom in that community.
Sure. Absolutely.
I don't know.
Absolutely.
It still is a good way to figure out whose baby was. It still was a wise approach.
Well, like, right. Like, what's the end game there? Like, what if nobody jumps in?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, then what? Then you're like, well, now the baby's just going to stay with me. And, you know, because I'm just a child. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. I can't have anybody to hang out with. I'm the king. No, I'm just teasing. Yeah, I mean, okay, so way back in the, way back, whole bunch of time ago when we were talking about Ruth, Ruth and Naomi. Some of the class sessions we were talking about romanticizing love, right? What is it? How much of the way that we interpret these texts, anytime something about love comes up, are we romanticizing it? Are we inputting how we might think about love, or even our romanticized versions of love? And so I think Sister Jackie bringing forward this test is not designed to determine the truth, but to identify love, like questioning that. I think that's one of the ways that we can interrogate all the implicit biases that we bring in to the text. Because as soon as you bring in the mother dynamic, everybody's going to have something. It's whether or not we're not like admitting it because we're trying to hide it, but more like naming it, right? So like whatever we think about that mother-child dynamic, this whole test is based on somebody's selfish nature being more important to them, like whatever their need is being more important than the health and living of the child, right? Than the well-being of the child and its life. And it's also banking on a true mother who would then sacrifice for the child, right? The child's needs are going to take the priority if it's the real mother, because the real mother would do that. So Reverend Cosette has put in love is sacrifice in the Zoom chat. Tell us more. Say more.
So it makes me think about Christ. God so loved the world that he gave, he sacrificed, he gave his only begotten son. So just, you know, even with that statement that is that is for her to give him up. It is actually sacrifice and that's what real love is. So that's what I thought.
Yeah. And there are so many different ways that we can talk about that too, right? Sometimes, and this, I mean, I think this is important for the church and church folks to talk about too. There are folks that grow up in families where that is not the case. You know, so making blanket statements about, you know, mothers and children, for children that are coming up in households where that is not the case, first of all, it throws off so much anyway. But I think the church has an opportunity to be able to speak about love in a way that doesn't say just because this person is the biological mother, or just because this person has a parent role within a household, it means this is automatically going to happen, right? We can talk about love as sacrifice. We can talk about love as life-giving. You know, we can talk about that, right? If it's death-dealing, it's not love. If it's life-giving, it is. Because even when we talk about Christ's death, we also talk about resurrection, right? So I think sometimes it's easy to kind of get swept up into, this is what mother's love looks like, even though many mothers do that. But in the reality, that's not always the case. And what does it mean when the church and church folk, when we're willing to name that rather than just like shove it under the rug, right? Because to be honest, folks expect us to shove it under the rug. The stereotype and much of the history says that we're going to just say, you know what, true love prevails and God loves us. And so everything's going to be okay. Right? All of that has been told and pushed on folks for a very long time in harmful ways too, right? So for us to stand up and be like, hey, there's a difference between saying this was a particular test and comparing two ways of being with children or being with other people, and making some sort of blanket statement that erases like harmful experiences from other folks. What else do you want to add to this conversation as we get ready to close for tonight?
That last, the people heard of his judgment and then they feared the king. For they saw that the wisdom of God was in him.
What interpretation do you have? What translation do you have?
King James.
Okay. Yeah. Do we have others? Mine says in awe. They stood in awe, which is awe and fear, are talked about a lot in the Bible, like back and forth. So any others? Awe and fear. Sometimes awe is the fear part of awe is because it's something we can't control, right? Sometimes it comes up because we're so in awe of that, like because we can't explain it, we can't control it. And some of these texts bring that into play to point to something that isn't fully human bound. Right? So Solomon's wisdom was beyond human comprehension kind of thing, right? This gifted, yeah, he was a smart dude, right? Yeah, he was wise. But in addition to that, this kind of wisdom, the one that's going to come up with this kind of test, that's because God is involved. This isn't just like Solomon's a king. And so, he's probably got a good head on his shoulders. This is God has made an appearance, and Solomon asked for wisdom and God granted it. And so the kind of wisdom that's going to come from Solomon is the kind of wisdom that we're not going to be able to figure out just on a human level. And what that does politically is it says to all the kings around, you might have all this great strategy, but please do not think that this King Solomon over here, just because he's not a warrior, isn't going to be able to out-strategy you, right? Because he's not a warrior. He is not a soldier, right? So all of the other kings that have warrior backgrounds, they're like, this guy's weak. What's he gonna do? His father killed a bear by himself and then went up against David with rocks, right? Solomon is weak. So, let's just go in there, right? But this whole thing, this whole wisdom thing, also is prepping Solomon to be a king that can't be messed with. Woo. Okay, we have like 5 minutes left. What you think? What y'all think? We didn't even get to the Queen of Sheba and all his many, many wives.
Well, the scripture tells us that there was never a man as wise as Solomon, and there never will be another one as wise as he is. So that's something that's kind of hard to comprehend. When you think about how smart man has become, and that they still haven't reached Solomon's plateau yet. So that's something to think about.
Right, right. On that level, thinking about like, that's it? Like that, I mean, this, based on all that we know right now, this wisdom was more than what we're seeing right now. Now, I'm also just gonna, like, tongue in cheek, I'm gonna channel Sister Marion from 12 o'clock and say, the text says nothing about women. No man has surpassed the wisdom of Solomon. But
That's true. That's true.
so, right, a little shout out to Sister Marion from 12 o'clock. I mean, look, if we're gonna wrestle with the text, we might as well wrestle with the text. We have all the women in the Zoom meeting too. So we're playing with our holy imagination. I mean,
Indeed.
what are we gonna do?
I don't know if
go ahead.
Solomon had anything to do with the building of the pyramids. I don't know, but man has not figured out how those pyramids were built. He still can't figure it out. They have done all sorts of experiments, rolling stones and cutting stones and trying to imitate, and they cannot figure out how they got those big stones, how they did it. So I don't know if Solomon had anything to do with that or not, but maybe one of his ancestors inherited a little something from him.
Dr. Fentress Williams says his building projects include the Wall of Jerusalem and the cities of Hazar, Megiddo, and Gezer. So if that's the case, right? Let's say it's the case. Let's logically play it out, right? But humans can't figure out the pyramids, right? Can't get in there, can't figure out how that's working out, right? If Solomon didn't have anything to do with that, and Solomon is more wise than anybody else, that means Solomon is more wise than the whole pyramid thing, right? And that's even more unexplainable, which creates the fear and the awe, right? Yeah, that's good. Any last comments?
They move the stones with their mind.
I mean, you know. I'll just say this last thing with the we didn't get a chance to get into the Queen of Sheba, but there's a contrast that's made, right? The Queen of Sheba is a foreign woman, right? And she is in the stories, the narrative helps us to see her and King Solomon as equals. So again, I mean, maybe this brings us back to like the nobody's wisdom has surpassed, right? They're seen as equals, and it is set up as the template for interacting with people from different countries, right? Different foreign entities. This is set up as a way that this is honorable, righteous, right? The other wives that he has, the other foreign wives that he has, are set up as the counter to that. These do not go well. And the way that it's talked about is that eventually Solomon starts turning his head, right? He's not paying attention to Yahweh anymore. He's not paying attention to God. He's paying attention to all that's going on, like where his foreign wives are worshiping and the gods going on over there. So again, there's this counter practice. How are the Israelites going to interact with other nations? And what does it mean to do this well? And what does this mean to not do this well? And they're still working through the history and the theology of Deuteronomy, that you must obey the Most High God in order to be seen as obedient at all. And that if you start to worship other gods, then problems are going to start. So that's set up in that way. All right, y'all, it's 8 o'clock. Thank you all very much for your great conversation. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of it. I'm always so grateful that I get to be part of these sessions, really, whether they're Bible study or whether they're worship, like services. I think they're both. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody who's watching on YouTube. Thank you to my fellow Zoom partners tonight. God, thank you so much that we had this chance to meet with one another and to meet with you. Thank you that we can be authentically us and still be in a place where we can question sacred texts, where we can wrestle with stories, and we can grow closer with one another and with you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for guiding us to be held in integrity to those we've been created and called to be. We pray these things in